Are regulators future ready? What if the flying cars are ready but the government doesn't have a policy? While banks and financial institutions go heavy on digital, the regulators also need to scale up. This session will explore the importance of regulator technology and what difference it can make in the ecosystem. Amol Dete, editor ETBFSI, is here with us to spearhead the conversation.
Hello and welcome to ETBFSI Converge. My name is Amol Dete, and I'm going to discuss RegTech with all of you. In the special segment of fintechs, we are going to discuss RegTech, means regulatory technology, which is still in nascent stage in India, but many developed countries are already following RegTech, which helps innovation to blossom in the ecosystem. I have with me Ms. Praveena Rai, the CEO of NPCI, going to uh, disclose a lot of information about RegTech and how the startups ecosystem can actually take benefit of RegTech. Ms. Rai, welcome on the show.
Thank you, Amol.
To begin with, Ms. Rai, if you could tell me your view specifically on the RegTech regulatory technologies. I do understand that it's still in the nascent stage. In fact, many people still try to understand what RegTech is and how will it be beneficial for India. So if you could tell me or help me to decode what RegTech is in terms of your views, and more importantly, how is it important for India?
Okay, I think that's a good starting point to first understand what is RegTech. And RegTech has become increasingly prominent as a vertical in the fintech sector, which is technology for financial services. And as the name suggests, RegTech is to support the regulatory aspects from a technology standpoint. The problem statement emerged, about a decade back after the 2008-2009 kind of, financial debacle and the challenges that were there globally, where regulatory requirements became far more stringent than they had been in the past. And this was a global phenomenon. So you combine that with action that later started becoming very fast-paced, where regulators would require market compliance, not to take years, but probably to take months and thereafter even weeks. And with increased digitization, increased technology, the regulators were keeping pace with the industry, and the regulators were trying to regulate the industry, and then the industry had to keep pace with the regulators.
Right.
So the pace of change on regulations also dramatically increased. And now you look at the pandemic situation now. It's created an environment where a number of regulations become more relevant, more prevalent, and the regulatory oversight becomes far more challenging. Where is a regulator to go for a system audit, for a supervisory visit in the situation of distancing and work from home and whatever have you. So the scenario for having to manage regulations through technology has really never been riper than before. Now, what is this concept of managing regulations through technology? Without technology, the regulations were managed through quick manual processes, fairly complex, fairly cumbersome, and hence, not very accurate. So the organization believes that they are fully compliant. The regulator believes that everything in place, but it is likely because a lot of this is fairly patchy in the way it is put together. That there could also be gaps in the entire process. And of course, there is always a user impact associated with all of this. So this is really where technology comes in and plays a role. And while we use the larger term of RegTech, RegTech really has two parts. One is you can look at RegTech, which is a technology for regulatory compliance. And you have SupTech, which is really the supervisory compliance, which is around supervision and controls around RegTech. So both of them play a role to ensure that there is the required vigilance, the required diligence that is required from a regulatory standpoint is delivered at the same time effectively and efficiently. So I think that's really what technology is able to bring to the table by converting this complex regulations and being able to manage it with the technology framework. I'll touch upon a little bit on the kind of applications that it has today, and then hand it over back to you, Amol, for further questions. So I think the first section will be from a policy standpoint, and so regulatory policy and how technology is an enabler for policy. A very good example would be a regulatory sandbox, for example, which provides a mechanism for input from industry, from fintech, to explore innovative ideas, without necessarily going through the entire tech development and then, coming for regulatory reviews. The second would be the area of, compliance as an enabler, regulatory controls as an enabler. So, for example, one could look at, digital onboarding. One could look at the kind of, AML, checks globally. Example of, online, digital, customer grievance. So all these are examples where regulators can utilize technology as an enabler. And it is to do with, regulatory policy and regulatory compliance. In the financial services space, especially if you look at capital markets, surveillance and controls, from a trading standpoint, also plays a very important role. And last but not the least, we spoke of SupTech. So SupTech is the ability to manage the controls and digitize the regulatory requirements, create the digital inventory of compliances that are required, and make this a supervisory requirement also that can be enabled through the technology framework. So these would be sort of the broad areas that encompass this subject.
Very, very interesting. And thank you so much for giving this basic introduction, because large part of the participants and the audience in India doesn't know what RegTech is. I'm sure your views are very, very helpful. But again, what you mentioned, I would like to add one important question here. How RegTech can help India? If you could add more on that.
So let's take an example, in the ongoing pandemic, where the biggest need of the hour, was digital, because everyone wants to stay safe. We need to continue to conduct business. We need to continue to, businesses have to onboard customers, and KYC, know your customer, being a very, very important component of that. Onboarding customers implied, use of, digital KYC mechanism, and that's where the big innovation on KYC, that was an outcome from the regulatory policy framework, was extremely useful. And if you look at the RegTech involved here, right? If you were to onboard somebody digitally, you need to know the authentication of identity that is provided. You need to be sure that a photograph that is provided pertains to the individual. If there is a video that is taken, there needs to be a facial recognition validation that it is indeed the same person. And in India, we have the Aadhaar framework to provide us a lot of support on that side. We will also require liveness check to be sure that it's not it's a real individual, on the other side who's getting onboarded. So all these controls are enabled through technology, right? And that technology now has been powered with the regulatory nod. So this would be a very good example of something very relevant, very current and important in India. Even from the perspective of the pandemic. Another example would be the use of large data analytical artificial intelligence kind of monitoring when it comes to transaction monitoring. So again, in an environment that we are in today, the chance of having transactions, right, which are inappropriate, which should not be actually presented, is very high. And there again, technology can play a very very important role, a far more rigorous role than can be done through any other mechanism to ensure that surveillance is really top notch. So these would be some examples that are very relevant in the Indian context that we are in currently.
Right, very well said. You spoke about Sandbox, and I have an important question here. So when Sandbox came, a lot of fintechs and startups were really happy, because at least they came to know the framework which is designed by the regulator. Okay, this is allowed and this is not allowed. And in fact, most of the times when you're talking about the innovation, the basic question that the innovators, or specifically the fintechs in the financial ecosystem, has is whether am I allowed to do this or not? Do you think that this mismatch will be avoided once the regulator or once the RegTech is there?
No, clearly the Sandbox is a great starting point for the same purpose. So when there is a fintech who's trying to try a new idea, So rather than develop the entire technology and then come to know that policy doesn't permit it, and when the policy is unstated, it gives them an opportunity to use the sandbox to test the policy and to provide their input and perspective for the regulator to then respond to. So this is again, this has been tried in India for the first time, and I'm sure there is a lot more improvement that can happen, over and above, and it's a continuous learning process. One cannot say that it can be instantaneous or automatic, but clearly provides a framework and provides a platform for the problem statement that you just spoke of.
So obviously in the digital and specifically in the financial ecosystem, what digital or what technology brought is the seamlessness, whether obviously UPI, Aadhaar, everything became so seamless or, so normal, and everything is instant and quick. On the other side, when you speak about the regulation, what comes to your mind is the complexity, all the regulations, all the policies are so complex that it's so difficult to read, analyze and grasp. So that is basically, one way of regulations. Do you think that the technology has actually the power and, what I can say, to empower all these complex regulations to make it seamless, the way we are doing payment, the way we are sending money to someone?
I think that's really the golden end state, and I don't believe any country in the world is there yet. Though there are a number of pilots and number of interactions that are happening in different markets. And I was interestingly seeing a case recently which spoke about machine readable regulations. So it basically said that when you write a regulatory paper, you also write the machine readable version, so that the adherence, the implementation of the regulation, the subsequent control of the regulation and the supervision of the regulation can all be built in through the tech framework itself. So it doesn't become an afterthought; it becomes part of the way the organization works. If you look at a car today, with all the remote sensors that it has, it's able to tell you simple things like when the fuel is down, and it's able to give you a lot more. The advanced cars give you a lot more indication, and of course, we're talking of the autonomous cars. So if you take that analogy, and pull it into the RegTech framework, I think with machine readable regulations, one can actually reach that state where we can self-test. Any organization can actually self-test where they stand on all the compliances they need to achieve. The regulator will similarly be able to get a mirror of that, because the intent of everybody is to comply, right? No one starts off saying I don't want to comply. If at all non-compliance happens, unless there is some ethical issue involved, it's usually a gap, because of the kind of complexity and manual processes we spoke of. So I think this is really a great end state to reach, and it's very doable. Clearly in India we are at a nascent stage, and different countries are at different phases of that evolution. I would say in the next 3 to 4 years we will see great strides being made in this space.
Right. One more question on this specifically regulator side. We have seen obviously regulators, specifically RBI, IRDAI, SEBI, coming with sandbox policies in the last 1 to 2 years, and they're trying to be as innovative or as progressive as possible. But specifically when we speak about the innovative regulations or the advanced regulations, I was just recently talking to some expert, and he said the problem in India is that flying cars will come, but we will not have a law to regulate the flying cars, and flying car will not fly. So, that is the innovation strategy that we do not have. Considering all these challenges that we are facing right now, going ahead, do you believe, how do you think that the regulators are looking at RegTech? Do you think that it can be a good weapon for regulators as well?
No, absolutely. There's no two ways about it. Like I said, the pace of change. So this is a very interesting cycle that is going on now. The industry, digitization, technology is moving at such a fast pace that regulations have to keep to the same pace there. And at the same time, if regulation is not moving at the pace they need to, then the flying cars will fall behind. So I think this, each one is keeping pace for the other. And I do think that regulators are in a very different mind space today, than they were many years ago. In fact, nearly most countries today in their regulatory organization, right? If you look at every central bank, they have a chief fintech officer. They have, they have a department that is now running fintech. So the awareness, the the thought, the vision that regulations need to be enablers, and regulations need to keep pace with the flying cars, is very much there. And I think once that is there, the rest of it will fall in place.
Very interesting thoughts. One more question I will take, because you are part of NPCI, and NPCI is dealing with a lot of innovators, incubators, fintechs, closely working with RBI. What kind of challenges do you see in the financial ecosystem? Because at one side there are startups who wants to do a lot of things in cryptocurrency. There are startups who wants to do a lot of things into lending, payment, and so many innovations are coming. Obviously, it has to be regulated as well. So, what kind of challenges do you see regulating all these, innovative startups of fintechs?
So the requirements from a regulatory standpoint, are fairly straightforward. There are certain guidelines that need to be followed. When it comes to lending, there would be certain purposes and so on and so forth. When it comes to compliance, there would be certain requirements. So I think broadly what is required is for every organization to manage their policies well and operate with complete transparency, and not really get burdened or overly worried about the compliance framework. I think especially in India, we have a lot of very smart people, so they'll figure the way to manage the compliance, rather than look at compliance as a side subject, as a separate department that's doing its own thing. I think if we make it part of the main organization, the mainstream, power it with the kind of tech that is now available, then it can become very empowering, rather than a burden. So I think that would be my sort of simple sage advice here.
Last question, since many countries, obviously we are in a nascent stage, but many countries have already adopted RegTech, maybe, USA, Australia. What could be the starting point for India, according to you, to adopt RegTech? Obviously, Sandbox is one, we are moving in that direction, but anything you want to, tell here on that front?
No, a lot of is already happening, Amol. It may not be all very visible.
Right.
Like I said, in the capital markets, there are already systems in place, to ensure surveillance of the kind of trading limits, or ensuring fair play practices are in place. Earlier, reporting for regulatory reviews and inputs would have been more review and report files kind of model, whereas now it is more API linkage. I think banks are linked, for example, to the to RBI, and they have access to the kind of data required that they need reporting of. For example, the inward and outward remittances from a foreign remittance standpoint. So a lot of basic RegTech is already in place.
Right.
Now is the opportunity to really take it from there and move forward, make it predictive. Bring artificial intelligence into play, bringing robotics, automation into play, to strive to bring that level of efficiency and effectiveness that we spoke about. So I would say we've sort of started the journey, somewhere mid path, but a lot more exciting opportunity out there.
There are exciting opportunities, and let's hope those opportunities will be grabbed, and many people will take good benefit out of it, and maybe financial ecosystem will blossom with regulatory technologies, or when there is no complexity at all. Thank you so much, Ms. Rai, for sharing your meaningful views on ETBFSI Converge. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you, Amol, for bringing that unique perspective. Now, I would like to bring to your notice that exhibition booth is all open for your visit. So make sure that you check out our booth and find out the interesting videos and the interesting papers our partners have to offer you. See you in the next session.